live in studio from Montreal in the basement of the big building in downtown Montreal.
The basement, yeah,
The basement,
where you
yes.
belong. The bargain basement.
With lots of news about and from Canada. And of course, I'd like to say hello to listeners on World Radio Paris, bonjour, and from the shortwave service in Germany as well, and on the Kauri 97.5 in Nigeria. And hello to you from all of us. And all of us today are Terry Haig waving, Levon Savance waving, me, Mark Montgomery waving, and unable to be waving to you, but still here and an important segment of the program are none other than Chantal Saint-Sauveur in the control room and Benoit Durand along.
Too.
She's waving, yeah, but they can't see her. They can just so wave to them for her. How's that? There you go. And of course, the man himself, the man who knows everything and controls everything and signs our paychecks sometimes, apparently, if we're good or bad, at least our time cards anyway. Pierre Commander Dutil.
He's not a great instructor, though. You realize that, eh? He's been trying to teach me how to do the Dallet thing for at least 3 years, and I still can't get it. Yeah, it's embarrassing.
I don't know if that says something about Pierre or you.
No, well, it's a teacher. You need a good teacher. A teacher that turns you on when you're in elementary school, right?
Is that what you told your parents when you came home from school? With
I had great teachers in elementary school. It was all downhill after that, until I got to 4th grade.
Well, you're doing okay.
Then I
here,
acted out.
Yeah, well, maybe.
But-
And as we turn the page, on the show today we have a lot of interesting things. Levon, what do you have for us?
Well, I'll speak with a researcher about a new study that shows that immigrants in the Greater Toronto Area are not climbing the corporate ladder that high.
Okay, Terry, what about you?
Surprise, surprise, eh? Wow, okay. Well, I've got a study as well, okay, about, traumatic brain injury and the homeless.
Okay, and I'm going to look at a story about food prices in Canada and...
Study?
Actually, it is a study. I was trying to avoid the word because we have a study after study after study today. Nonetheless, it is kind of going to affect all of us, and that is the fact that food prices are likely to go up, and I'll be talking to an expert about why that is. And that's coming up on this edition of The Link Online. All right, we're going to be looking about this issue of immigrants in the Greater Toronto Area especially, but I suppose it applies pretty much across the board. And this is something that you've looked into, and apparently they're not doing as well as one would hope.
No. This study shows that while many immigrants in the Greater Toronto Area have made great strides in landing their first job, that very important first job in Canada, very few of them make to the upper rungs of the career ladder. The study was done by the Toronto Region Immigrant Employment Council, and it shows that only 6% of executive positions in the leading public, private, non-profit organizations in the GTA, the Greater Toronto Area, are actually occupied by immigrants. And this is despite the fact that immigrants make up nearly half of GTA's population. It gets even worse than that if you bring in race and gender into the equation. It shows that only 4.2% of executives are from racial minorities, and only 2% of executives are immigrant women of color. For more on this, I spoke with Yilmaz Ergundink. He is a policy analyst with the Toronto Region Immigrant Employment Council, and he's also the lead author of the study.
There's a lot of discussions around Canada making progress in providing better opportunities for immigrants in the job market, which is true. The newcomer unemployment rates are at an all-time low, and employers are becoming more appreciative of immigrant talent, and there's a lot of effort by the government, by employers, and by the settlement sector to find ways to advance immigrant talent. But most of these efforts are focused on the immediate outcome. For immigrants get the first job. There isn't that much attention being paid on what happens after. Do immigrants advance in their careers? Do they reach management positions? What are the kind of jobs that they are getting? Does this match with their field of training? And eventually, the main focus of the research, do they reach senior management and executive positions? Because, Canada is immigration system is kind of built on the premise that we will leverage the skills and talents that the immigrants are bringing. And if you don't have immigrants at the top leadership positions, that means there's a bottleneck there, that you are not fully utilizing the talents and competencies of the people that you are bringing here. And that's very costly for Canada and for the world, because these are talented people that bring their insights and experience from all around the world.
And Mr. Dink says having immigrants in the top executive positions actually makes perfect business and management sense.
There's a lot of research that shows that diverse leadership drives innovation and creativity. You don't want homogeneous leader, whether it's companies, whether it's the nonprofit sector, or whether it's government, making the same decisions. Different minds think differently. That means they will find different solutions to the same problems. And the research also shows that organizations that have leaders from different backgrounds, different genders, different ethnicities have better competitiveness and higher profits. And again, coming back to the question, Canada wants to have a very diverse labor market, and also to be connected to the global markets to do business. But without immigrants in decision-making roles, Canada's labor market will not have that global outlook. So you need immigrants to realize their full potential and reach executive positions if you want Canada to be competitive in the global fora and the global economy.
And that was an excerpt of my interview with Yilmaz Ergun Dink. He's a researcher with the Toronto Region Immigrant Employment Council, TRIEC, and he's also the lead author of this new study that about challenges facing new immigrants in their career advancement in the Greater Toronto area. But he was saying actually that the study can be basically applied to the rest of Canada. So in the rest of Canada, it's pretty similar picture.
I would guess that it might even be a worse picture, because Toronto is by far the most diverse city in Canada, if not North America, and if not in the world. I mean,
yeah, 50% of the population almost 50% are immigrants, and about 80% of that 50% are from racial or minorities. So if the situation is that bad in terms of executive positions in Toronto, in the rest of the country it's probably even worse than that. And also don't forget that Toronto is the big business capital of Canada. So
by far, yeah.
A lot of head offices for corporations that operate across Canada
or internationally
are based in Toronto. So if the Toronto head office doesn't have top executives, it's very likely that the branch head offices across Canada also don't have those diverse leadership in the executive positions.
Well, especially again as other major cities across Canada aren't even nearly as diverse as to begin with as Toronto. So you've got all these factors, one on top of the other. So if that's the situation in Toronto, it is probably even worse elsewhere across the country.
It would be interesting to have a study and actually take a look city by city and what's the situation like in the rest of Canada.
This is why I like sports. No, I'm serious. It doesn't matter what color to a point. It doesn't matter what color or who your uncle is. He can get you a job, whatever. If you can't hit the curveball, you don't get to play.
Yeah.
Okay? It is a meritocracy. There's exceptions to it, but generally speaking, it's the best person gets the job. And that's what makes sports exciting. That's one of the saving graces of sports, I think.
Well, can't argue with that.
Absolutely.
And don't even think about it.
I won't.
Okay.
You're coming up next.
No.
You're on deck, as they say.
Okay. And baseball, yeah.
Actually, I just wanted to say hello to a few people I noticed who were waving to us from the Ethernet.
The Ethernet.
Yeah, Christoph Sayevich. We have Gustavo Lucas. We have Ahmad Masoud, who's watching us probably from Afghanistan. And we have somebody from Bangladesh. Unfortunately, I cannot read their name tag because it's in the Bengali script, and I haven't learned to read that yet.
Christoph, is he
Christoph is from Poland.
from Poland? He's a regular visitor to us. Hi, Christoph.
And we also have our own former Marie-Claude Simard who's watching us on.
One of the great
Hello,
mentions of all
Marie.
time.
Hello, Marie-Claude. Good to see you.
Did you see the picture of her on the internet the other day when she had with her cello and they were playing on the South Shore a combo, or I don't know what you call it in classical music. In jazz, it's a combo, and she looked so beautiful, man. She's sitting there with her fellow musicians with her cello, and she looked absolutely gorgeous.
She's enjoying her time without us, Terry. That says a lot.
I don't blame her.
Yeah, wait a minute. All right. But we do have some serious subjects still to come on the program. Terry, you're going to be looking at the homeless and a medical condition, right?
That's right, the same thing.
Yeah.
Oh, you want me to do that now?
No, we're going to go to a musical break.
A musical break. Okay. Are you going to sing?
No.
Livana sing. Well, let Livana sing.
Quick, save us.
Bring them.
Well, once again, we're back. And Terry, this is the story we mentioned just a minute ago.
I can sing the intro.
No, you don't. Please don't. No. We want to keep our listeners.
Okay.
But this is actually a very serious story because,
big time serious.
Homelessness is certainly a very big problem in Canada. And one of the reasons may be something that you looked into.
Okay, so there was a study done, and these people out in Vancouver, studied from 6 different major countries, studied the homeless. What they found out was that basically 1 out of 2 homeless persons very, very likely suffered traumatic brain injury. And that's really important because brain injuries, that's memory, concentration, behavioral symptoms, et cetera, and it's good to understand this. And these people are already carrying a big load. So I spoke to the lead author of the study, Dr. William Penenka. He's a physician and researcher with the BC Neuropsychiatry He's really smart, psychiatry program, and the Provincial Health Services Agency, as well as an assistant professor at the University of British Columbia, about the significance of the research and why these findings are important.
Why that's important, and there's other reasons, but mainly it's because it affects their functioning. So, and another part of this study focuses on the fact that it's associated with poorer physical health, mental health, higher suicide risk, memory concerns, increased health services use, and more criminal justice system involvement.
It's so sad, eh? Wow.
Yeah.
It's incredible. Just as you're talking, I'm thinking of people on the street, and they really don't have a shot, do they? Pretty much.
Well, and being on the street, it looks like it's bidirectional. So the traumatic brain injury can be a potent factor getting you on the street, but then when you're on the street, you're also very vulnerable. So your chances of sustaining a traumatic brain injury once you're there look to be, markedly higher than the chance for you and me. And again, just going back to that sort of the severe range, another one thing that we noticed is that because as part of our studies down there, we've got a large research team of very motivated young students and other people. We do brain scans on many of our participants, and almost 10% of them on an MRI scan of the brain actually have small visible parts of their brain missing. That's likely from trauma. So it's not just they're having an injury, but it looks like they're having pretty severe injuries.
But taking it to the chicken and egg, you couldn't establish whether TBI increases the risk of homelessness, or it was the other way around, right? That still needs work to try to figure that out, right? Although, if you're carrying this burden onto the street, it sure doesn't help, as you just said.
Right, and that's actually an interesting observation. So, in answer to your first one, yes, we're looking into now. It's causality. So, which one caused the other? And it does look like it's bidirectional. But it's something we're trying to, firm up with studies now, so that you can then, potentially try to target effective treatments, when the injury is occurring, and try to prevent all the other repercussions of it. But yeah, the walking around homeless, with a brain injury, these brain injuries affect things that aren't obvious to a lot of people. I mean, this is because the parts of your brain that are most vulnerable are what we call the frontal and temporal lobes, the front and the sides of your brain, and that's where your mood, your thinking, your memory, and your behavior comes from. So they go unnoticed because they're rare. It happens, but it's very rare that you have a brain injury and you become paralyzed, say, because that's not generally the most vulnerable part of the brain. So they're silently walking around with these problems, which accentuate all the other problems that they have that we can get into. But there's a myriad of other issues, challenges and barriers that homeless people face. And yes, they're more vulnerable and less able to deal with all that's going on because of these brain injuries.
That was part of my conversation with Dr. William Panenka, who led the study into traumatic brain injuries in homeless people around the world, essentially. I mean, they took data from everywhere to compilate it or whatever, compile it, put it, what do you call it? What's the word?
Compile it, I guess.
Compile it, yeah.
What do you?
Compile it, the information.
Yeah.
So it's not just Canada. It's homeless
around the world. Yeah, it's not just Canada. It's horrible. It's just horrible. And these people already. I mean, we walk down the street, we want to look away, right? They're alienated. They're by themselves. They're lonely. It's horrible. So at least now, if this study is accurate, and I imagine it is pretty accurate, at least we know we have a better shot at finding a proper way to help them and help society at the same time.
We come to work every day. I get here quite early in the morning, and you're traveling on the public transit system, which in Montreal has a subway. And you see people sleeping in the subway, and I've seen people sleeping on the streets in winter here. And I'm going, this is tragic. It's terrible. And you just say, what can we do?
This part of the town where our building is, Maison Radio-Canada, is the kind of the southeast part of the Montreal downtown that has a lot of homeless population. We have a big hospital. We have a few shelters around, and it's also the area where people go to get their drugs and everything. So we do across, walking to and from work, you come across several groups of homeless people here.
And it's not just brain injuries. I get it. I mean, I know people that work in shelters, especially women. Women. A lot of people just get their identity stolen in identity theft cases. They have boyfriends or husbands that beat them and steal everything and steal their money. It's rough, man. It is really, really rough. It's not just we have this built-in prejudice, it seems, toward them, and it shouldn't be. I mean, they are our brothers and sisters as well, right?
It's the thing is that once you're on the street, it's very hard to get off.
That's right.
There was a study, I remember a study done in Toronto many, many years ago. And it was by CBC. They went out and interviewed some of these homeless people. And a great many of them actually had been the middle class.
That's right.
And they had suffered one or two or three major hits in their life. Like, they had lost their job. That's hit number one. Their spouse leaves them. That's hit number two. And depending on your own personality, sometimes one hit is just enough to put you on the street. And maybe it's the second hit that puts you on the street. But these were people who had been brought up in middle class and they'd had good jobs and everything else, but something happened along the way and they end up on the street. And of course, as the doctor pointed out there, once you're on the street, and you pointed out, it's rough. If you didn't have a brain injury before, you could possibly end up in a fight with somebody, whether you wanted to or not, and suffer another brain injury.
And imagine never being able to sleep peacefully. I mean, you fall asleep on one of those benches in the subways, you never know what's going to happen. And plus, there's people that are going to come and steal whatever bag you might have under your bench. I mean, you can never relax, I would think.
I would tend to agree with you on that. Anyway, well, that's a situation, I guess, that better people than us will be dealing with and trying
If
to.
but we have to deal with it because they have no political clout. These people, they're the last people anybody thinks of when it comes voting time, right?
Well, yeah, absolutely, because they don't vote.
They don't. Yeah, exactly.
Half of them don't have ID papers anymore, I would imagine.
Yeah.
So
Hey?
it's a tough situation, and like these people said, it's not just here; it's worldwide. There are situations like this worldwide.
I think we have over 200,000 homeless people in Canada.
All right.
It's in the story. There's a link in the story to homelessness in Canada. Beside, and the full report of the report is in the story.
Yeah, and actually, it
paper,
reminds me
the
of
study.
a story I did not too long ago. That there are about, roughly speaking, they guess 3,000 former veterans on the street.
Oh no, really?
You know,
Wow.
these are people who serve their country.
PTSD.
Possibly, or something else happened. I mean, military life is a tough life. It's tough on home life, you know. So, anyway. So if you have any thoughts on this, of course, or anything that we talk about on the program, drop us a line here at RCI, and we'll take a look. And maybe if you have any questions, we'll try to answer those as well. Coming up, another study.
Isn't it great when Pierre plays the guitar and we use it?
He's a man of
And
many
he plays
talents.
us into the next session. I
He
know,
plays the
it's-
piano, the guitar.
He does it all.
He does it all. He can even play an orchestra.
Oh, he can do it all. Except teach me how to work the ballet.
Yeah, well, teaching you much is, you know. You can teach him something, but not much. Anyway, good news.
Yeah?
Food prices are going up
Hey, yippee!
above the rate of inflation. In fact, a new study that was done by the University of Guelph in Ontario and Dalhousie University. They do these studies now once a year, annually for 10 years. This is the 10th study. And they say that food prices in 2020 will go up by about 4% or more above the current inflation rate in Canada, which is about 2% right now. And they estimate that to feed a family of 4, it will cost you over $12,600 in 2020. And that's due to things like climate change. And this year, it's also due to a problem in China where they have swine flu, which means that their swine herds have been reduced greatly. So they're buying meat products from around the world. And as they buy that big market there, the meat prices here go up because there's shortages and so on and so forth. Anyway, I spoke to Sylvain Charlebois. He's the director of the Agri-Food Analytics Lab at Dalhousie University, and he is the lead author of the report.
For this year with meat, there are some issues in China. China's buying a lot of meat products, and that's why we're going to have to pay a little bit more for pork and beef as well. They are dealing with the swine fever. They've actually had to call a major part of their herd in Asia, and that's why they're buying pork and beef all over the world, really, including Canada. So this is not just a phenomena hitting Canada, but it's actually hitting everywhere.
Are there certain types of foods that are going to go up higher than others? I mean, you mentioned meat, obviously, but what else, perhaps? I heard a report that because of crop difficulties here in North America, there might be a shortage of potatoes.
Yeah, every now and then our climate is playing tricks with us, and so every year we kind of have to really be ready for these types of issues. It's happening more frequently. Of course, climate change has been around for a while, but what is different is how volatile prices are due to climate change. So you just mentioned potatoes, for example. Well, we are seeing our crops were affected by snow, early snow, and we are expecting prices to go up probably by March or April once winter inventories actually get low. So this is the reality that we have to deal with, unfortunately.
Is this likely to change how Canadians shop and the foods they eat?
I'd say, yeah, absolutely. I do think that people will be triggered and will be enticed to change their habits.
Is this likely to affect, for example, the restaurant business, which will have to increase its prices, and people will say it's just too expensive to go to the restaurants now?
We are spending about 36% of our budget on food service, so food consumed and processed outside the home. And that ratio is actually increasing every single year. So if there is one way to save money, don't spend as much at the restaurant. Absolutely, because you get less for the same amount of money. But that means that you would need to cook more and spend more time at home. And for a lot of people, that's almost impossible to do.
Is this a sort of a worldwide phenomenon?
When you look at the entire globe, I would say that Canada's food bill is catching up to everyone else, excluding the Americans, of course, because in America, they do have access to the cheapest food basket in the world. But when you go to Europe or other places in the world, people do spend more than 13% of their household budget on food. It's close to 15, in some cases close to 20%. So our percentage is actually quite low compared to the Western world.
And that was an excerpt of my conversation with Sylvain Charlebois. He is the director of the Agri-Food Analytics Lab at Dalhousie University, and he is the lead author of that report. And one of the things I thought was interesting is that if you saw the pictures there was a picture of a soybean field completely was full of snow, because the snow came early to Western Canada and caused a great deal of difficulty with the crops there. So that's one thing that's going to affect all kinds of grain crops in this country and around the world, because Canada, of course, is a big market selling exporter of wheat and soybeans and other things like that. Pulses, yeah. The other thing I thought was interesting is if you saw that report on the TV watching us live or your computer, you see the images. There's a greenhouse with marijuana in it.
Yeah, I wanted actually to ask you about that, because I saw those images and I was wondering how this new marijuana industry that's really growing by leaps and bounds in Canada, it's probably competing for resources and land with the food-producing part of agriculture, no?
Well, this is the thing. One of the things that they said in this report, or a comment from one of the authors, is that we should have a national food policy to protect us from the vagaries of the world market, because we're a big importer of food as well. And so, when we're importing foods that we can't grow here in winter, then we're at the mercy of other markets, other weather conditions elsewhere in the world. So the author said, we should be growing food here, and because of our climate, we could grow them in greenhouses. Now, we do have enormous greenhouse operations for food. One of the stories I did not long ago, in fact, said there are major greenhouse food producers who are saying, I can make more money with marijuana. So they're stopping.
That happened in California a long time ago.
They're stopping growing
biggest
food,
cash crop, yeah.
And they're growing marijuana, which means, of course, that we now have to import the food that we're not growing anymore. Yeah. And they're even starting to grow marijuana in fields that used to grow food. So I think this is short-term thinking, in my opinion.
This is on top of the feed that we're growing for the cattle and for animals. So already, a lot of our agricultural land is taken up by things that are not foods for humans.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I suppose you could argue in a roundabout way it's still food if you're growing, because you're growing it for milk products too, milk and cheese and so on and so forth. So, but when you're taking that land out of anything to do with food and putting it into marijuana, it's like there's short-term thinking here. I think so it's a bit.
Is anybody on the case?
Well, it's report like these guys say. For example, it's reports like this that hope to raise the issue in people's minds and politicians' minds, the people that make the decisions. Now, of course, you're up against money. If you're a farmer and you've got like 100 acres, and you're growing, I don't know, tomatoes or turnips or something, and you're making X amount of dollars, and you scratch your head and say, I can make 2X if I grow marijuana. Are you going to tell him not to? This is a problem. Anyway, on that note, that's all the time we have for the show today. So for Chantal Saint-Sauveur, Benoit Durand, and Capitaine Dutil,
what's he going to play now?
Terry,
what instrument?
Levon, and myself, take care until next time. Bye-bye.